In this video series, we're going to learn about using functions. By the end of the series, you should understand how functions facilitate abstraction in code, know the proper syntax required to make function calls using a function that's written by somebody else or provided in Python in the standard library. You'll have looked at example methods in the Python library and learned how to call them, and know what's meant by the term argument and return value. In this video series, we won't be learning new syntax that allows us to solve problems that we couldn't previously. At this point, we're able to write a wide variety of software using the 5 tools in the programmer's toolbox that we've covered already. Those are variables, arithmetic expressions, input and output, conditional statements, and repetition statements. Those 5 tools allow us to solve any problem through software. Functions are the last tool in the programmer's toolbox, and they don't allow us to solve new problems. They allow us to organize our code to be more efficient. A function is a sequence of programming instructions that are grouped or bundled together, so that if somebody wants to execute this whole group of instructions, they simply have to call the function by name rather than typing all of the individual instructions in their program. In programming languages, useful functions are collected over time into groups called libraries. And Python includes a standard library of functions, and we've been using it all semester. So today we're going to look at some examples of functions that we've been calling this semester and think a little bit more explicitly about the implications of calling these functions. In each case, when we call a function, we'll notice the kind of information that we have to provide to the function to pass into the function in order to carry out the algorithm. And we'll call this information that we pass into the function the arguments for the function. Many of the functions that we're going to consider also create a response that's reported back from the function code. In these cases, we'll also note the return value that's created by the function. Anytime a function returns information, we have to capture it or store it in a variable. Otherwise, Python just doesn't remember what the function's return value was, and then we can't use it in our program. And that's not very useful. So today we're going to be looking at some examples of functions you've already seen this semester. We'll be noting the name of the function, the arguments that are required, the information that goes into the function, and we'll be noting the information that returns from the function. That's called the return value. Let's remember some functions that we called earlier in the semester. At this point, we're just going to review the purpose of these individual functions, and then we'll talk about the syntax for calling them and come back and review the specifics later. So the first function we're going to look at is the print function. And we know the goal of the print function is to display information to standard output. We learned about the print function early in the semester, and we've been using it all semester long. It's part of the standard library in Python. Another function we've used many times this semester is the input function that allows us to receive data from standard input. Some additional examples of functions include the int function that allows us to change the way a data type is treated so that it's treated as though it's an integer value rather than a string. We've looked at the length function, which we can use with both strings to determine how many characters are in the string, and we can use it with lists to figure out how many items are in the list. A final example of a function that we've been using this semester is the type function that returns the data type associated with a variable. We used that early on in the semester to determine what kind of data type is associated with a particular variable. So if it stores something like a floating point value, the data type's a float. But if the variable stores string information, the data type's a string. Now that you're familiar with some of the functions that we've seen over the course of the semester, let's get into the specifics of the syntax.